of energy racism in order to make sense of the electricity crisis in South Africa, which in fact is an energy crisis. The CSRP is busy with a research project into this crisis. So far, we have conducted more than 40 interviews with Soweto residents, including some interviews outside of Soweto. 2 weeks ago, members of our research team presented some preliminary findings from the research, and what came out was the extent of the problem faced by ordinary working class people because of the broader electricity crisis in South Africa. The team also reported on how the people try to cope with the crisis, including the use of alternative and often dangerous energy sources such as paraffin. The team also touched upon how people try to organize themselves in order to improve their situation, including engaging in protest and sometimes trying to fix the technical problems themselves. The findings focused on one area in Pimville, Soweto, an area called Sun Valley, where 88 households have not had electricity for more than 10 months. Comrade Mimin Sibilwane, one of the residents who lives there, is on this webinar. It should be apparent that the CSRP research project approaches the crisis from the point of view of ordinary people. It focuses on lived experiences and it looks at the needs of the people, at how they experience the crisis, what they do about it, and what solutions they propose. In a way, it is an attempt to approach the question and understand it from below.
So if my phone rings, bring it to mommy, okay?
Let's mute them, Terri.
Sorry, Trevor.
The
audience, if you are not speaking, please can you mute my? Thank you so much.
Today, the aim is to build upon these findings to try and make sense of the findings from a theoretical perspective. What is the best way to conceptualize the energy crisis in South Africa? We propose the concept of energy racism. It is interesting to note that this conceptual lens was inspired by the murder of George Floyd. This African-American man from a working class background, without doubt, made history. His death sparked off one of the greatest movements against racism in the USA and beyond. The last time we saw anti-racist mobilization and mass action at this scale was during the height of the civil rights movement in the USA and the times of the anti-apartheid movement, which was arguably one of the greatest movements of international solidarity in history. The Black Lives Matter movement has sparked off renewed interest in the concept of racial capitalism. Academics and activists in the USA started reading the book by Cedric J. Robinson titled Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Tradition, where Robinson uses the concept of racial capitalism. The significance of this is that the target became capitalism itself, and that this was happening in the USA, inside the belly of the beast. Inspired by this exciting development, we came up with this concept of energy racism. How useful can this concept be in making sense of what is going on in South Africa? The concept of racial capitalism was developed here in South Africa, notably by Neville Alexander, who was a Marxist and also Black consciousness revolutionary who spent some time on Robben Island. Many scholars in other parts of the world came to know of this concept from a pamphlet written by Martin Legasik and Dave Hampson in 1976, titled Foreign Investment and the Reproduction of Racial Capitalism in South Africa. So that is the background to today's discussion. And with your permission, I'll just make a few general points which I listed there. So maybe I'll just skim through them. Firstly, South Africa's energy system is based on the exploitation of Black cheap labor. So black workers historically provided the cheap labor which powered capitalist industrial development in South Africa. And the provision of a reliable source of energy in the form of electricity produced from burning coal also relied heavily on black labor, as it was black workers who were digging out the coal. It was black workers who laid out Eskom's electricity pylons. But in the urban townships and rural villages where black people lived, electricity was hardly provided for individual household consumption. I think here, if I had more time, I'll talk a bit about the minerals energy complex, a theory which Fine and Rastom G came up with to explain how a set of industries, in South Africa, including mining, were reliant on Eskom power supply. Apartheid was a form of racial capitalism. I think I've touched upon this, so I'll just leave that, maybe mention that the South African Communist Party came with its own theory of colonialism of a special type, which tried to deal or explain the same phenomenon. Of course, also with gender, Harold Wolpe's thesis of black cheap labor was based partly on the exploitation of the unpaid labor of women in the Bantustans, from where migrant labor was sourced. In 1975, Liz Clark and Jane Ngobese dealt with this in their book titled Women Without Men, a study of 150 families in the Ngutu district of KwaZulu, which is my hometown. More comrades have written about this. Capitalism continues in post-apartheid society. Okay, I won't say a lot here. I'll just comment that there's a new book making waves by Dr. Sizwe Mpofu Walsh titled The New Apartheid. Apartheid did not die, it was privatized. So he makes an important point that although South Africa as a socio-political and economic project did not make sense, indeed was somewhat incoherent, to quote him, apartheid still dragged South Africa in a specific historical direction. And then the black working class bears the brunt of the electricity crisis in South Africa. I'll say more about this during this discussion, but for example, black workers pay with their labor as producers of electricity. They also pay as cash-paying customers for electricity. The black working class, they suffer the hardships of an inconsistent power supply since they are the preferred targets for load shedding and load reduction. They also suffer atrocious servicing. Routine maintenance and urgent collapse are either ignored or it takes Eskom days, weeks, months to repair faults. For example, Sun Valley has been without electricity for more than 10 months to date. Also, the black working class is scapegoated and blamed for the failure of Eskom. For example, the reference to the Soweto debt is in Nyoga, there are too many shacks in the township, etc., etc. And then lastly, energy raising as a conceptual lens to understand this social injustice, I'd like to explore, that's why, in fact, we invited Comrade Mosa Phadi, explore the ideas of W.E.B. Du Bois, who engaged with race, who said race was, the key problem of the 20th century, but he also later became a Marxist and tried to incorporate class analysis. We've got intersectionality. Some of the earlier people like I mentioned, dealt with what is called the triple burden women face in South Africa and the world. Kimberly Crenshaw, we've talked about racial capitalism. And then there is a paper written by Greg Reiters where he discusses environmental racism, where he argues that, the black working class is caught up in that form of racism. So there are many, many issues, one can explore around this issue of, the antecedents or related concepts, which can affirm or clarify the energy racism concept. I think, Comrade Chair, I will stop there and then just let Mosa respond, and then maybe later I can share more findings from the research. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Trevor. That was within your time, so well done. Mosa, I'm going to hand over to you. You got 10 to 15 minutes to respond to Trevor, and then you guys are going to go back and forth a bit. Thanks.
Okay. I think the first point I want to say is that you are right. This is it's a class struggle problem here that exists. But I am also very wary to start off of like, how do we, put certain concepts to the current? How do we think about racial capitalism in the current phenomena? How does it produces itself in a nuanced way? And as a provocation as well, one of the things that has happened, because I have to be in Johannesburg for personal matters for the last few months, and I was at home. And one of the things that I have to be aware of being in Kagiso in a township is like every day I have to check my Twitter to check the load reduction schedule, whether my township between 5 and 10 o'clock in the evening is affected. Therefore, I need to cook before that time, or 5 in the evening, in the morning until 9 o'clock in the morning, whether I'm affected, so that I don't have meetings before 9 o'clock. So my life, or many others who live in the township at this juncture, that's their life every day. You have to check, if you have Twitter, whether what time is this low reduction, they call it, it gets affected. So there's a class struggle. When I'm in the suburbs there, none of that is happening amongst the Black middle class and the whites who have maintained the same privileges as before. So there's an issue here around class and how it manifests itself. But before I go there, I think one of the things, and therefore I think we need to think carefully about how we think about racial capitalism, because sometimes, in the plight of the Black working class, there's a way of, especially the Black elites, co-opting some struggles as theirs, actually not nuancing some of the privileges that they have that the working class do not have. Then there's a second issue that I'll go to Lephalale, where Medupi is being built. I did some work there a few years ago. And one of the things that happens, it relates to ISCOM, but from a different vantage point, that I think in your research you have to think about. Matimba was built in the late 1970s, 80s. When Matimba was built there, huge, construction happened there. A township called Marapong in the Lephalale was built literally next to Matimba power station. It was a huge, industrial phenomena that happened there. Then there was a plummet. Then again, when Medupi was decided to be built, huge booming, construction labor of all sorts. I mean, to the point where there was a time when Medupi, when it was built, Lephalale was the most sought after for developments, for developers. I mean, it was the value of a house was equal to Neisner at some point. That's how big and how demanding it was in terms of thinking about the marketing thing. And when you walk, when you drive to Lephalale, where Matimba and Medupi, a huge, you meet, like I can't explain unless you've been to Lephalale, like Medupi is like enormous. But one of the things that happens there, the township of Marapong is just behind the previous built power station. Now it's Medupi. There's an environmental issues. People are like literally, there's a place called Huot Gelek, where they were supposed to build new housing for people because there's a lack of housing, and also because the municipality doesn't own land. So they had to purchase that land and then articulate that land, then build housing for that. But they cannot build houses for people now, ordinary people, because everybody is sorting and is seeking mining licenses. So next to literally 100 meters away from Grootegeluk, where the housing is supposed to actually start, there's a mining that's supposed to be built there. So legally, you cannot build a mine that close, houses that close to a mine. So there's like this confusion that is happening there, where people cannot get housing because someone got mining licenses in that area. And we have to think about these things in terms of like the Palade has become sort of a site of this coal energy that is happening, that is affecting ordinary people and the environment there. I mean, to your point, if in this unbundling of Eskom and more private power stations that are going to be built there, it means like the weird point where literally people cannot breathe, that we only be breathing coal and one day having cancer and asthma as the sense of being. Then there's the second thing. Then we have to think about also the historical aspects of it. And also in terms of like how certain companies like Exxaro, which was actually state owned, and when it was privatized, it became privatized at some point. And actually the profits of a state owned was literally transferred to private hands without actually gaining. Those are fundamental structural issues we also have to think about as we think about this energy in relation to other things. And I think where Medupi is being built, there's an issue around land. I mean, you're dealing with a municipality that doesn't own land, which creates other problems, and also for the working class, and also determining that life. It means property developers are the ones who determine how actually spatial planning actually works in those areas, and various things. That includes also how energy gets affected and various other things. But also when we build this energy and waiting for Medupi that is never ending with these explosions that are happening to it, at the core of it is like the labor that goes and builds this Medupi. And there's a boom for a second. And this is actually, when we think about South African capital, these temporary short-circuited moments where there's like a boom for a particular area. Then after that, there's only one person who's going to be left in, not one, but I'm exaggerating, a few people from 1,000 to a few people where they're going to just be switching on the light. So again, we don't have this long-term view of sustaining the economy that actually can enhance the area and the people as well, who are left now with environmental issues and that are actually going to affect their health and so on in that process. So, so when we think about, when we think about, energy, I think we have to, especially for the working class, we have to think about the structural issues, so how history collides with the present when we think about racial capitalism, because it's easy for me conceptually to take a term and put it here. And I think, and I think where, you spoke about Du Bois, and I think some of the work that he does, I'm obsessed with this man, so forgive me in advance. What he does so well, you see the evolution of how a different epoch of history, even though he still believes the cornerstone of capitalism is racism, how it mutates. Because one of the things about racism is that sometimes it's not against the demands that we're making. Sometimes it mutates with the demands that we're actually making in the process. So also as as we fight for the working class, we also have to understand that capital has a way of actually integrating some of these demands and look like they're ours, but not necessarily so. I don't know how many minutes. I'll leave it there. Then we can ask questions. Conversations.
Okay, you actually had 1 minute left, but that's cool. Perfect timing again. Trevor, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's why we got Comrade Mosa here. Yeah, exactly. Actually, Mosa, you got me interested in Du Bois, and I've been reading some of his stuff, also secondary works, you know, and I did get that sense that, I mean, he wrote over what, 5-6 decades. So, you know, he changed his ideas, but he did stick to certain fundamentals, yeah, because he was a very strong-minded person, it turns out, and a very interesting character, actually. And then sometimes it turns out that sometimes, like I'm trying to do now, or what we're trying to do, he would deploy a concept not only because of its scholarly or theoretical accuracy, but because he was fighting a struggle. You know, he was trying to push a position in order primarily, you know, to help African Americans who were really, you know, struggling under racism. And remember, at the time that Du Bois was a sociologist, at least the early days, there was this scientific notion of racism. You know, scientists wrote that, yeah, Black people are stupid, or they've got small head craniums. So he had a real big, you know, challenge. And sometimes he would actually use concepts only in order to win an argument or to make people aware. And in fact, that's why I like him. He was a bit of a Lenin, because Lenin also did some things just because he wanted to push forward the struggle and not for theoretical nicety, whatever, accuracy, yeah, as we are inclined to do as academics. Yeah, so I really like that. And then, for example, he would use race as a kind of metaphor sometimes. Yeah. And then I really take that point about what Lipalale has become. So this is a point which actually Greg Reiters makes in that 2008 article where he talks about environmental racism, because he argues that, he says, watch out for the power of capital. So capital builds cities and destroys cities. Yeah, exactly what you say. So one day you have a nice, stable, economically secure community, like in Detroit in the USA, you know, with Henry Ford, and then they just, you know, capital moves, packs its bags and moves off to China or something, and then the community is destroyed. Now, in South Africa, there's a guy called Louis Bank. So he did the study into Duncan Village. So he shows, you know, like Soweto, you know, he shows the historical importance, significance of Duncan Village. For example, he says in the 60s, 70s, the biggest number of activists who went to Robben Island came from Duncan Village, you know, and there's a long history there. He even suggests that Duncan Village was the Harlem of South Africa. Usually we think of Sophiatown as the Harlem of South Africa. But he talks about the degradation of place because of unemployment, poverty, poor governance, you know, all sorts of things, corruption. In fact, in my book, Onama Committee, you know, I write about how the ANC completely distorted grassroots structures to serve the ANC and to serve by proxy capital. Yeah, so when we're conducting our research in Sun Valley, I did get that sense that this place is being degraded. And behind it, we might blame the ANC government, but really it's capital. For one thing, all the Black middle class move away from Soweto, which leaves a concentration of poverty. Can you see? Also, with the lack of public transport, with the lack of a stable, fourth industrial revolution, a stable connectivity, a stable electricity supply, the place gets further degraded. So I really take that point about the power of capital, and it points to the real enemy behind the ANC. Of course, the ANC, we have to shoot it down. I mean, it's the front face of this oppression exploitation, but behind it is the power of capital, and behind it, it's a capital whose history, is mired with racism, sexism, homophobia, all kind of social evils, and these continue. And as you say, it mutates, but they continue in various ways. Gated communities, the market now decides who is in, who is out, who is included, who is excluded, but primarily it's capital. So I really take those points. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Trevor. Mosa, do you want to come in?
I want to come into, because at the core of it, I think, as we think about capital, and it's important to think about how this, because I don't know how to say this, but it worries me, but I don't know how, I haven't thought hard enough in terms of precisely distilling the idea, but is to think through how, because at this moment we have the Black elite who are incorporated into this capitalist agenda. Some of the things that people are saying in terms of reviving the township, it feels like I'm listening to Big Water during, the 1980s ideas, township, a renewal economy, we are renewing the township economy. It's and you sit there and you're like, this is Big Water's ideas. And now all of a sudden they've become part of our political ideas. And it's the same thing with the energy crisis that we're actually facing. The spokesperson of ESCOM spoke about why is it the township has a load reduction, and this punity that they have. The answer was we have historical problems. So now we've gone back, and that's the crudeness of the Black elite and actually the elite bureaucrats in the system, is that now the answer, because they fail to have any political imagination that is outside capital, that is outside the institution that inherently has perpetuated racism and actually oppressed the working class. What they're actually trying to do now is to go back and say, no, these are historical problems. They are, you're right. The parallel, it is part of the historical problem. However, the story doesn't end there. You failed in winnable remedies to actually change certain things that you could have. And this is where we find ourselves. This is where we find people across the other section of my street, literally, the other section of my township, literally people have 4 or 5 months without electricity. These can be fixed, but actually to punish and to create this idea that actually, people have to pay for electricity, implementing prepaid in the most, poverty-stricken areas where people cannot afford to buy prepaid electricity nor water. And the only way to actually buy prepaid is actually going the illegal route because, if they have to buy 100 Rand with 5 families or 10 families in the household versus adding another 100 Rand illegally so it can make 100 watts to survive, they will do it. But this is not because of, they want to have extra legal agendas. It's because actually people are poor, and actually the system that is being implemented by ESCOM and various other state apparatus that has privatized many things, including water, is that it's actually anti-poor in the various core of it. And the system could have changed in various ways, but it didn't change because ideologically, the people who have some political power, some, not all, right now for the last 27 years, failed to actually imagine any other political imagination that is pro-poor. And we find ourselves in this process. And I think we have to think about those questions hard and long, and what does actually mean, and how does it affect the audience, and also how we write as intellectuals, because this becomes also poor work, because the earnest is in us to actually speak truth to power, not slogans to power.
So in South Africa, that guy, Comrade Ibrahim Harvey, wrote the book, The Great Pretenders, where he grapples with race and racism. And his argument is that, people have to understand exactly what is race. And I saw also with Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, he's grappling with those issues. And I think you've already mentioned that, racism also mutates, the racial structures, they change. So for example, we find that the Steve Biko's definition of blackness, is under attack. Now, people are just saying openly, Indians are not part of the Black nation. So part of that is what, that young theoretician, Andile Zulu, calls how we split, racism from class. So on the one hand, people like the DA are trying to deny race. It doesn't exist. Color blindness, everyone is equal now. The playing fields have been leveled. On the other, the aspirant black bourgeoisie want to argue that we're not fighting against capitalism. We're just fighting against racial segregation. You should be happy that now you've got black billionaires. In fact, the ANC and the South Communist Party, they've got a theory for this. We must create a patriotic black bourgeoisie. So those are some of the contradictions which come up and the incoherence. Now, the reason why I was quoting Walsh, both talking about incoherence, is because his point is that inside and because of that incoherence, that gobbledygook, Zuma with his Zulu Beshu, Ace with whatever, and Ramaphosa, I don't know, but, capitalism, the class enemy continues to win, okay? Of course, we have to take into account that it wins in a context of the global crisis of capitalism. So in a way, the bosses here as everywhere, are dealing with problems of profitability. They're dealing with how to maintain law and order. So, when we did our 40 interviews, we were supposed to close the project, start analyzing, and we did start analyzing. In this project, one of the great analysts is Luke Sinwell. And then, by then we decided, let's maybe extend the data collection for a month in order to explore what has been called the looting, what Eddie Kotl, who will soon be joining CSRP, calls the uprising, the attacks on the malls, because we think that in a way, that happening is so big. I mean, more than 300 people died, during the attacks on the malls, and this week is the week of Marikana, 44 people died in Marikana, but 300 died. So it's a major, major development, and it have a huge impact, on the working class movement and on the understanding of ordinary people of what is going on in South Africa. So I'm just saying that despite the incoherence, despite the instability, because, the ANC took the responsibility, of running the capitalist state. And then it wanted to do that with the help of the alliance, COSATU, SACP. But COSATU has lost its authority, over the working class. The SACP has got no authority over the working class. Indeed, the ANC itself, if you go on the ground, the branches, they hardly exist. They exist behind a leader who is sponsoring because he wants to get into power. So, you know, the ANC, although it has taken this responsibility of maintaining bourgeois law and order, it hasn't got all the ammunition, the tools to do that. So this stability and all that is happening in the backdrop is, you know, international crisis of bourgeois democracy, which can no longer deliver, you know, its promise of well-being for all. Yeah.
I mean, like one of the things that we have to think about, you're right. I mean, one of the things, like the over-reliance on coal, I mean, one of the things, I cannot emphasize how this is going to affect the environment and also the healthcare of the people. And the people, even though we do all these mines and it creates some job which becomes, you know, precarious in various ways because it comes with the health issues, the people who are going to live with asthma, cancer, this, you know, deserted with like no healthcare to actually deal with that massive illnesses, is going to be the ordinary poor. So we have to keep, like, in terms of the environment that is being butchered and that is actually affecting and butchering the working class health, and also in a very weak system. So when we think about energy, I think it's quite important that we think about those components as together. They play along, and, you know, and gender has been also crucial because the people who bear the brunt is the women who have to take care of these men and these children, and on top of it, this invisible oppression that is not in a spectacle like men, you know, because, you know, yeah, Black men sometimes when they go on about their plight, they forget the invisible oppression that actually Black women carry in the household in various ways, even when they become domestic workers. So we have to think about those questions. And then there's an issue around race and class. I mean, like, you know, I think partly the problem with this debate around race and class and gender in it is that I think we as Marxists have failed to engage fairly on these questions. You know, like, I mean, I've been hearing the debates on what happened with in Phoenix and so on. It's the lack of even understanding amongst Marxists, the lack of even understanding how race and racism actually manifests itself. There is like this erasure that happens, especially amongst white and crude orthodox Marxists, of this erasure of actually not understanding Blackness and actually how it affects the daily experiences and the institutions and also the state and capital in itself, without understanding how, like Du Bois, how, like, you cannot understand capital without understanding that it's cornerstone, and he uses that word, it's cornerstone, it's racism. And I think we have failed, especially Marxists, not only to address this question that race and class is important, but also to even read the work of Black scholars who've been producing work that we know evidently, I mean, it's other work, but actually contemporary work for the last 160 years, that we always refer as if the Marxists only come from Lenin and other people actually comes from actually other scholars who happen to be Black, but because, and they had a particular emphasis on that. So what I'm trying to say is that, and when we think about energy, when we think about these questions about energy racism, we also have to understand what do we actually mean in the Marxist terms, other than just Black working class, because it manifests itself different. And hence we're sitting here with a problem where nobody except inserting some of their own research topic into what's happening in Phoenix. Like, it's a mess. But actually, if we're honest with ourselves, we don't understand what the mess is. And it's complicated. And we have to be honest about that in that process, i.e. also in thinking about race and energy, that we actually have to delve into those questions. in a serious note about how we understand Blackness, how it affects the ordinary. And also we have to be honest about it. There's been a whole body of historical and traditional Black liberals, you know, like they're not starting now. The ANC and the liberal agenda is not starting now. It's been in existence since forever in relation to the left as well, like the ultra left who are seeking other alternatives. So in this spectrum of Black thought, we also have to be honest that they actually exist. And also they've dominated, unfortunately, they've dominated often in our struggle of working class, most often the people who capture the struggle and actually capture the state, using that as an ironic term, but it's true. Capture the state happen more often to be the Black liberals, and then they actually align with the class ideology of capitalism. And Cyril will do what he can, as much as he can, to protect capital and Eskom, rather than actually the poorest of the poor. Okay, that's it. Sorry, my heater is going off. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you for those inputs, both of you. Trevor, we've got 2-3 more minutes of this session before we open up to the floor. Do you want to just wrap up with some quick points? Maybe you can share with us some of those key findings.
Yeah, so we found, exactly the points which, Comrade Mosa is making. For example, with gender, other research, even in the global north, shows that women actually bear the brunt of what is called energy poverty. So when a family or a household, is short of energy, the woman will be the one, for example, marshalling the family, how to save, make sure that when you are not in the room, keep the lights off, let's all be in one room. And then in the global north, they show that usually the man will take care of, retrofit, like, okay, I will fix the generator if it breaks down or something like that. And then, of course, also because of the sexual division of labor, the women are taking care of children. And then it turns out in our research that it's a very traumatic experience to experience extreme energy poverty. So you find that if you are a mother, now you want to feed your kid properly, but at the same time, you can't cook 3 times a day. So that creates, feelings of embarrassment, shame, guilt. It's also found with male partners, fathers. There's one guy I interviewed in Sun Valley. I mean, you can cry, he's unemployed for the past 10 years. And he says casual jobs are hard to come by. And then they are all now, he says, I'm the oldest son here. They're now reliant on his mom's pension, so he says, she took care of me when I was young. I should be taking care of her. So there's tremendous trauma. So I think that maybe the value of what I can call bottom-up research is to actually go inside those households and see the dynamics there, how people actually experience, the energy crisis in South Africa. Of course, racism, the history of racism, someone like the CEO of Eskom, De Ruyter, with a history of, working in Mondi or wherever, retrenching Black workers as part of a turnaround strategy, is going to have very little sympathy for a granny in Soweto. In fact, that's Eskom is playing hardball. If they want you to install prepaid meters and you resist, they switch you off until you go and beg them, please install prepaid meters. And in fact, it's terrible. The community of Sun Valley, after 10 months without electricity, at one point wrote a letter of apology to ESCOM. We apologize for ever questioning your right to install prepaid meters in our area, So that's the kind of, very hard tactics that people like, CEO De Reiter and, Skonati Manchasha, the spokesperson are pushing. And then my last point, I will admit that I am that orthodox, crude Marxist, but the students of 2015, Terri and them, they taught me a lesson. And I really had to go and read my Fanon, go and read my Du Bois, go and read even my Makubane, Bernard Makubane, to rethink things. So, and I take to heart, the dangers of class reductionism. I think I was too scared of race essentialism. So if you grow up under apartheid, the whole thing is, no, one non-racial society. But you don't see the ways in which, racism, as Greg Reiter says, racism does not depend on racist laws. That is why young scholars like Mpofu Walsh are now kind of shaking us up and saying, hey, you think apartheid is gone? No, it lives. It lives in many different ways. So, the project is how we can use, the concept of energy racism, to strike that balance between class and race, also and gender. One of our board members, Comrade Donna Andrews, says it's racial gendered capitalism. And indeed, the findings indicate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. And on behalf of the student movement, you're welcome. Let me go
Can't hear you,
to
Terri.
some of the comments. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks for that. Let's get into the discussion. If anybody wants to raise their hand, they're welcome to do that. Look, students, I know you guys are itching to contribute. Sorry, friends, I'm on my phone, so it's a little bit difficult. Does anybody want to raise their hand? Cleopatra Shezi, please do that.
Thank you, Terri, and thank you, Mosa and Trevor. So, Mosa, based on your experience in visiting Lephalale, it's so disturbing that I've been to Lephalale myself for some other research purposes. So it's very disturbing that Medupi is next door Lephalale, and in Lephalale they don't have electricity, they don't have water. It's a mess with everything. And if that's the case, what does it mean that Lephalale can cook electricity for us here in Soweto and other areas, while they are neighboring areas? In fact, the most important beneficiaries, which is Lephalale people, they don't have electricity. And when we question them, even worse, they don't even hire them to work there at Medupi. They bring their own people to work there and not the SMEs. So what does that mean? And again, my observation is that we are led by idiots, I have to say, but I'm sorry to say, we are led by idiots, because even Gwede Mantashe can't see anything that is wrong with energy generation. Instead, they are busy adopting nasty policies that will suit them alone, forgetting that the working class are the most affected ones. Today, if I can make an example, today, if Eskom will say we are shutting the entire South Africa down, Gwede and them, they are staying in Sentin, they have generators, they have solars. What about us as the working class members? First of all, they are not saying anything, including us in decision making. What does that mean to us? Do we have to fold our arms and say, no, it's fine, we will wait for them to lead us? Or do we have to lead them as they are meant to lead us? We have to lead them and show them on how should one be operating so that everyone understands the racism, especially on energy issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleo. Let's go next to Luke.
Thanks so much.
Sorry, Luke, let's go to Luke and then we'll go to Mondli after that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mosa and Trevor. I almost feel like you're co-lecturers now because you've both spoken to my class at least a couple of times. So yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time and exploring the concepts again here as we try to understand the meaning of racial apartheid, energy racism. And I just want to prompt some of the students because we really do want to hear your voices, whatever kinds of thoughts and questions. It sort of like grounds us because we can be talking about these ideas, but we want to know, what you're thinking. And I should just mention that, I have 11 students and they've just done, between the 11 of them, about 15, if not 20 in-depth interviews on the electricity crisis over the last week. And they've been in the process of transcribing them, so you might have some questions, and then they'll also be linking, like in their final paper, those empirical findings to some of the, whatever theory it is that they choose, really. So you might have a question that could be just a question to the presenters about clarity, or you might have some ideas that came up in your research. They were in Orange Farm, the East Rand and Ngwane, doing online interviews, obviously, but they did manage to do quite a few. So you might have some ideas or some questions, or you might tell us something about your findings, even if you wish.
Great, thank you, Luke. Yeah, and I think it would be very interesting to hear from the students some of their thoughts, because I find often students have very difficult questions to answer. Okay, so let's go to Comrade Mondli, and then we'll wrap up that round and have Comrade Trevor or Mosa respond to those, and then we'll get back into some more questions. So Mondli, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to say something, thanks. I think this is a very interesting and a fascinating project, and I like the concepts that are being developed, right? And they have a direct link with the empirical evidence, right? Just one point, there's no debate about who, there's a debate, of course, about who discovered electricity. There's a big debate about that. But there's no debate about the fact that electrification as a process began in the late 1800s, right? And Kimberley was part of that process, right? Now, that is what is regarded as the second industrial revolution, right? Now, today, it's 2020, right? We have a huge energy crisis as well as energy racism, right? And the intellectuals, academics, and professors are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, right? And yet we haven't even started to address the issues of the second industrial revolution, which really began in the late 1800s, right? Now we seem to be jumping too many stages, right? And I think for me, that says a lot about the disjuncture between the debates that are being conducted by the academics, scholars and so on, and the reality on the ground. So that's my first point, right? My last point is that this really says a lot about the character of the ANC, who's the ruling party and who's been in political power for more than 27 years, right? So it's a huge statement on the ANC, right? And another point I wanted to make in relation to that, I think conceptually we tend to speak about apartheid and post-apartheid, and I had a long discussion with one of my comrades, and my argument was that kind of a dichotomy can really confuse us, because many of these energy policies were also developed by the apartheid regime. So so I think that's what we need to think about. I think some of the younger scholars are actually making us look at those issues. I thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Mungi. Trevor or Mosa, do you want to respond to those comments and questions?
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if I was paying full attention because I was also reading in the chat box some long things there by Comrade Kaziboni. Okay, so I saw a question by Eileen, all the way from Germany. Hi, Eileen. So she's asking the relationship between energy racism and environmental racism. So I'll just give one example, but basically, both in the environment and in energy, we find racial patterns of either energy poverty or environmental degradation. So for example, in the USA, like in South Africa, there's a concept legally of environmental racism. So they found that African-American communities sometimes are located, or often are located next to, rubbish dumps, Yeah, so, you can take legal action against that. I think the Constitution here also mentions something about everyone has a right to, a safe environment or a clean environment. So, the link is that, for example, you find that there's something called indoor pollution. So I don't have the figures, but it's found that where people die from diseases emanating from indoor pollution, meaning you are cooking using either imbawula, brazier, or paraffin, or welcome Dover, the old stove, and you're inhaling the pollution because you don't have, clean energy. 85% of those who die are women. So, because they are doing the cooking. So that is the link between energy racism, environmental racism, and also, gender oppression and exploitation. And then, okay, so the concept of racism, because I think it's important, because these days, like I think Mosa was complaining about how people understand what happened in Phoenix, in Durban, the anti-Indian feeling going around. You know, it's important, you know, for radical scholars, scholar activists, Marxists, to deal with these issues head on. And I think there's no better way to do this than to actually start from the needs of the working class, rather than start in the abstract, you know, I don't know, but, you know, if you start somewhere in the air, what the police did or whatever, you might end up, you know, being trapped in racial categorization or racial essentialism, often historical distortion or anecdotal analysis. So I think we do need to theorize, you know, the continuation of racial patterns. And also, for example, we know that on the one hand, you know, we were fighting against racial categorization, but racial categorization is also a tool, you know, for affirmative action. Okay, I know people don't like Black economic empowerment, but there's a slew of theory of policies which are designed to roll back, you know, the economic or social legacy of apartheid, and they are based on racial categorization. So in a way, we find that we have to really theorize and be careful how we approach, you know, these racial categories. You know, how do we deal with state definitions? Because the state defines you, you are colored, okay? So you qualify for a tender. You are Indian, you don't qualify. You are Black. So, you know, we have, and also remember, many social scientists, you know, they use, like we do, they use racial categorization. So, you know, these things must be approached gingerly, and you have to theorize and always be aware. So I think there is no better way than basing this on something which affects the working class directly, the working class needs, like energy. And then I think we stand a better chance of not falling into class reductionism or race essentialism. Thank you.
Great. Mosa, do you want to respond quickly to some of those questions and
Sure.
comments?
You know, I think it's a very strange thing for me. And I still don't understand why is it strange, but it is. It puzzles me every time, and maybe it's me not seeing the world as it should. But, you know, being Black in the world for almost 4 centuries, you were structurally, scientifically, institutionally defined, and socially and politically, you were defined as inferior. It's not by mistake. I mean, I get that debate should not even be, you know, like people were slaves with no rights by virtue of that. And I think these things, for some odd reason, we have to apologize and and still appeal to some moral approach. It shouldn't be. These were facts. This is the reality. We can talk about race as Du Bois says. It was socially constructed, but however, it shaped millions of people's life for centuries, being Black. That's what racism did. Socially constructed, but actually people's lives and positionality and where they fall in society were shaped by those realities for centuries. That's a fact. And that makes it uncomfortable. Yes, mutation happened. And in the mutation of like capitalism, mutate, it created with the struggle. It was not given. Democracy, as Du Bois always said, Black people gave democracy to the world. One of the things about that is actually seeing another person as an equal. And it took Black struggle to say we are humans too, to be seen as humans. It took Black working class to say we are humans too for reforms to happen. It took Black women to say we are humans too to get pills and so on, and healthcare that is actually for the woman. So, you know, like it's not a debate. we can talk about the class element to it, because as we mutate, as we struggle to be seen as human in a capitalist world, class formation happens. And I use the word, we have a precarious Black elite that actually, because they're Black elite, liberal in various ways, the positionality is very different from the Ruperts and the other international elites. And also we have to complicate that as well in thinking through it. Do they have the same reality as us? No. As once upon a time, I always said to people, you know, the university has class differences. There's a cleaner who cleans the class, and there's a students who attends the class. That's the different, Black as they come, but that's the different realities they have to face. And we have to confront that as Black people. That is someone who's cleaning after you, and is someone who's there to actually get education. That's the difference we also have to think about as well, as we think about the Black plight, because sometimes the Black elite, precarious as they climb upward, they use conventional ways. We are inferior without understanding that class position. And sometimes we get the working class sometimes get into this illusion that they're with us, which necessarily is not. But anyway, and also I think it brings back to Mondley's point about the role of the intellectual. And I think what has happened with these neoliberal universities is like actually we have divorced ourselves from ordinary people, i.e. we actually forgot that actually the working class also theorized the world. They actually put theory into the world every day. And what does it actually mean in relation to our theoretical world? And I think we have to go back to that very principle as we theorize energy, as we theorize physics and so on, that actually there is something. And why are they theorizing the world? Why is it that these ideas that they still perpetuate in this particular way still stand in this particular way? And it's our job to actually not only speak to the ordinary people, but also to push back against certain theory that has become normative and neoliberal, because actually we've been living with neoliberal ideas for the last 40 years. And actually we think some things that are common sense are not common sense, that are actually embedded in neoliberal ideas, i.e. the policies that are given about how to fix the energy complex sometimes from both the bureaucratic elites and some intellectual elites, i.e., you know, they talk about the fourth industrial complex as if there is no class element to it, like, you know, and those are, and these are intellectuals, by the way. They have PhDs and are professors. So there is a failure amongst intellectuals in various ways. And I do agree with that. And I want to say, I mean, I saw Anthony's comment on the municipality. The transition, which actually, it's been a permanent transitioning since the 1980s. You know, like actually when you read from like the transition that has been happening from the 1980s in terms of the fragility of South African state. You know, like people were buying, especially the elite and the middle class were buying food when the riots and the uprising was happening during that time in panic. You know, both Black middle class and the white middle class and the racist sort of inclination that they grew up with came very strong during the uprising. But we've been living in a fragile state. I call it a perpetual instability. South Africa, before apartheid, during apartheid, before the Republic, has been a fragile state that has shaped and actually oppressed the working class. And all of this fragility of the state is at the core of it is like the Black middle class have been feeling the brunt of it. And I think we have to think about those questions hard and long as we think about this. And also when we talk about the energy complex or the fourth industrial and creating online private schools for some universities, as well as if we are living in an equal reality where we're accessing internet, all of us. But anyway, that's my comment in terms of, on municipalities, sorry. That was the point here. The point was on municipalities. to understand institutions. So I worked in municipalities, so I spent months, dodging bullets in some municipalities there, and threatened to be killed in some municipalities. But the point is, bureaucracy is not simple. This idea of corruption as if there is no politics into the state, this idea that we're gonna have this neutral law, like I hear capacity building, we have to have more policies, rule of law, whatever, like all these things. Well, they're important, of course we entertain them and are quite crucial. However, the state that, we have to think about, how do we build a state that is built on racism in the current era, an institution that is not anti-Black and configurated, and what are the rules of law and bureaucracy is needed to do that? It's not a simple answer. It's a complicated thing. Yes, they're not getting the Auditor General says all the municipalities are chaotic. But how do you explain chaos in Nepal, where the municipality cannot build a house? They have to ask some Afrikaner there to actually give them land in order to build a house. How do you explain in Mokopane, where what is it? The people who determined development are the old guards, and the Exaro used to manage pretty much everything, and it still manages spatial planning in that area. And thinking about this spatial planning and how Anglo and other spaces actually still integrally involved in the municipality and in its bureaucracy. These are not easy questions. And to only, now with this state capture, as if like these things are divorced from ideology, these things are divorced from politics, it's not real. And I think when we think about institutional capacity and building the institutions, as our president now uses those lexicon, we have to think hard and long about these questions, because each municipality has its own space. Kimberley, for example, I was in Kimberley like many years ago. I was in this municipality. There's no, they say the tender processes, for example, is to get 3 suppliers from your area. There's no one there in Kimberley, no one to procure tissues. So they, of course, inherently, they're gonna just find the nearest person to give them to procure tissues or to procure whatever else. They're not gonna follow the rules of the law because there's no one there who have the skills or businesses or whatever they need. So actually we have to start thinking, as we think about state capture, corruption, municipalities, think about the histories of these municipalities as well in this process, and also the ideological issues around it. And what does it mean for the working class?
Chris, thank you for that, for those responses, Trevor and Mosa. I want to challenge the students in the group to participate in this round of questions. So if you have any questions, students, I'm not even going to look at the chat for now. I really want to challenge you to put your hands up and ask a question or give a comment, or maybe give some of your own experiences of this concept of energy racism, because I know from being a student during the lockdown, it's difficult to navigate issues of load shedding. If you've moved back home, for example, or if you're living in a house with lots of people. So students, let's hear from you.
Hi, Terry.
Hi. If you can just tell us your name and then go for it.
Okay, awesome. My name is Ayanda. I'm actually coming in from the anthropology department. And, this is really a big interest to me. Particularly, I enjoyed sort of Trevor's, so there's 2 things. Trevor's, this conceptualization of framework around energy racism is such a powerful one, because it extends our understanding of energy just as this thing or this capacity to do work. But I also like the example that you've made, Terri, around, energy racism, kind of helping us answer those every day, because obviously from an ethnographic or anthropological point of view, for instance, how people's lives in the everyday have been affected by this idea that there's some people who have access to energy and people who can't. And I think it's such a powerful thing. But really, my question to both Mosa and Trevor is, so my focus is really on the introduction of this transition that we've seen in the sort of renewable energy space, and kind of how are they thinking that, you know, that this introduction or this transition, you know, sort of like how can you start to think about this energy transition using the frameworks in which they've laid out? Because I think there's such powerful things, but I think because now that there's this introduction of this renewable energy and there's like this greater language around it, it would be interesting to hear what their thoughts are on that.
Great, thank you, Ayanda. Any other students? I'm going to take one more hand. If anybody wants to raise their hand and ask the question or contribute to the discussion.
I think just give them a minute, you know, sometimes it takes 20 or 30 seconds, but someone in my class at least will raise their hand, I think. But I don't think we do justice if we just move on, you know.
Sorry, Luca, I didn't really hear that.
I'm just saying, can you give them, you know, a few seconds? I think one of them will comment or ask a question.
Yeah.
Or they're too busy transcribing their material, that could be, so they might be focused on what they're getting direct marks for. That's
Hopefully
possible.
they're not doing it. Yeah.
But I can see they're here.
Yeah.
You're here, Zinhle, Bimbanyashe, Rufutu Chedzwa, DeMarco. Any kind of question or comment?
Hi.
I know. Here we go.
Hi.
Here's one.
So I'm super random. I'm actually from Stellenbosch. I came across the seminar post and I thought it was super interesting, and I was not disappointed to hear the debates and things. So my question is, so what I've seen is with capitalism, there's this new move into this new, it's like a revamping of the neoliberal economy where we're trying to use capitalist principles to kind of put the blame on the individual to get themselves out of poverty through this concept that's applied in the renewable energy space that's called social entrepreneurship. And it's supposedly so that people will use the advantages of a capitalist economy to pull themselves out of poverty, and then at the same time add to the economy and alleviate all the social problems that we have in South Africa. So I just wanted their thoughts on that, because yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Any of Luke's students, I'm going to give you guys one more opportunity. I know it can be quite intimidating in spaces like this, but it's a very good exercise to challenge yourself to say just something small. So let's just wait a minute or two.
I didn't put enough in the syllabus for class participation, but it is there, so.
Hello.
I mean, yeah, even outside of doing it for marks, it's a good personal challenge. And I speak from experience. I was always forced to say something in seminars. So, yeah. Okay, well, given that we don't have a lot of time, we still have one more week for Luke's students to make their appearance. Let's go back to Trevor and Mosa. I'm going to give you each 2 minutes just to respond to these last two questions and wrap things up so that we can end today's session in time. Mosa, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. some of the things, I don't know anything about social enterprise. I have to be honest. What I do know is around how neoliberal has created this idea of individualism. And I think we have to be careful about it. I mean, it starts with the phone, you know, like, you know, our little apps, you know, like there's it's a simple concept of how neoliberal works, including energy. Like now, all of a sudden, everybody has to, you know, I hate paper straws, okay? Because now it's like, it's about waste. And what you get as I drink my milkshake, it's a paper straw and it ruins my milkshake. And I want to say this, not because I'm like self-centered, but I am. But also it's like, while I'm drinking my milkshake with a paper straw, next to it is something with plastic, like a huge, what is it, grinder that has plastic on it. The salt has plastic on it. Everything else has plastic except the straw. You know, like, it's like the most bizarre thing that ruins my day every time it happens. Because it's like, and you just see the level of capitalism in terms of like now has actually individualized that in order for you to save the earth is to drink with a paper straw versus everything else that they produce every day, which include plastic in massiveness of it, you know, and it's like the worst thing. But anyway, it's the same as the idea of an ad, where your phones, we so like neoliberal ideas are so ingrained in us because now everybody you can choose your app, which one works for you, which one doesn't work and stuff. And a massification of monopoly capitalism, i.e. WhatsApp, Facebook, Google, and so on, that actually have become their own superpower. And I think sometimes when we talk about these industrial revolutions, we actually have to talk about also in what is continuous in this is the monopoly of capitalism and its features in different ways, from the mining of coal to social giants now, Google, Facebook, and so on, and how actually they're all interlinked in this financialized racist capitalism that we have to think about it. And also how the ideas, the ideology of everything that we do now stems to like fixing it yourself. You can't like, and I think people have to start thinking hard and long on how we actually, these individualistic ideas are perpetual in thinking through this idea. Well, before I get attacked, I'm not saying the paper straw is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I'm just saying it's the irony about thinking about waste management, in thinking about capitalism and the whole thing, and also how individualistic neoliberal actually works in the process of it, and the individual responsibility that is being given to us. Yeah, I just leave it there.
Thank you so much. Trevor, you want to say anything to wrap it up? We are over time at the moment, so.
Yeah, okay. So the danger is that, like apartheid, you know, capitalism mutates, but it's under pressure now. It's in crisis, but it will still use, you know, ideological mechanisms like the way the World Bank will use empowerment, you know, to ram through structural adjustment policies. So, you know, concepts like social entrepreneurship, they're not all bad, but it's also an attempt to straddle altruism with, you know, profit making, because there's this critique of profit making, you know. And then I just wanted to say, from the findings, you know, there's fragmentation. People are fighting, you know, Sun Valley is not getting enough support from surrounding communities like Zone 7, Pimville, even Zone 5, Pimville, where they are. So because of desperation and the survival instinct, everyone, you know, wants to save their own skin. So, you know, that's the challenge. And then, of course, renewable energy, yes, we wanted a just transition to renewable energy, but we don't want it, in the hands, we don't want renewables in the hands of the same white monopoly capital. So, NUMSA has called for socializing, renewable energy. And then my last point is that capitalism is a totalistic system. So, it covers everything. It takes over the whole world. Energy is an important aspect of that, but there are many other aspects. So if you can locate the concept of energy racism and the struggle for safe, reliable energy, affordable energy for all, we should locate within a broader struggle, for fundamental structural change so that all forms of oppression and exploitation are done away with. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Mosa. Thank you both. I learned a lot from this, and I think there's a lot that I personally need to go and read and understand more about. Students, thank you for joining us. Audience, thank you for joining us. We will be back next week on the 26th at the same time. And we're going to be hearing from some of the research participants whose findings we were discussing today. So next week we will hear from the community who is experiencing this issue firsthand. And I hope all of you will join us. And this recording will be made available on the website. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Terri and Trevor.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
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 Cheers. Stay safe.
Ish. We missed one.
Yeah. Hey, Claire,
Hello, Trevor.
Claire is gone. They wrote a report for, I don't know, Oxfam. Hey, it's beautiful, that thing. Jesus.
When Trevor Ngwane. Trevor.
Hello.
You're speaking to Tulam Sindo Kamolimpopo. I missed what you were saying. Is it possible for us to get your presentation?
Okay, Terri will send it to me, and then I'll send it to you. Can you write your?
Let me quickly write. Yeah.
Can you write your email?
Let me quickly get to the chat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Trevor, you. Sitokana. Quickly. There it is, Trevor. Sitokana at gmail.com.
So we're in Polokwane.
Why don't you just say that for
Hey,
me?
Polokwane. I'm actually from Seshego, but now I'm in Polokwane Flora Park.
Oh, I know Flora Park and Fauna Park and
I
Fauna
have been
Park.
following, yeah, Flora Park.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always been your follower for some time. This is Trevor.
It's him. Well, thanks for attending.
I am so happy. I'm so happy. I'm going to read the presentations. I missed. I joined very late.
No problem.
Okay, I've got your email address. I'll send everything to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to end the call now. Thanks, everybody. This was great. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Terri.
Bye.
Trevor has always been this person.